Good evening, my name is Elana, and this is my core assessment presentation for federal government. I will start off by saying that the prompts and questions that were listed to answer were all very good prompts, and I did have some trouble choosing this question just because I felt like everything that I wanted to pick were all pretty serious problems that we are facing as a society today, but I decided to go with: should the United States federal government ensure that every worker can earn a living wage? So my title is The Price of a Paycheck, a Living Wage for All Americans. And I just feel like this title speaks a lot, saying that some people in our world today, they do live paycheck to paycheck. A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. And it's very important that every worker should be able to earn a wage that they can support themselves and their families without having to worry about choosing which basic need do I need to take care of. Should I take care of my rent or my groceries? Just things like that. So moving into my first slide, the dilemma of a living wage is the fact that people in the United States, they work very hard, they work countless hours for very minimal pay. And the unfortunate part is that a lot of these people, they work more than one job that is minimum wage. They don't make a whole bunch of money for all of the hours that they work, and they still have to go home and feed their families along with themselves. And like it says here, there are millions of people all over the world who are affected by minimum wage. This issue, like I said, it does not only affect the certain individual, but it also affects their family, their children, and just simply their livelihood. I do not believe that anybody should have to worry about, should I pay my rent? Should I pay my groceries? I need to buy things for my kids. I need to buy things for this person and this person. And I feel like that is one of the biggest problems in our world today. Small businesses are also affected by the minimum wage to living wage because it can hurt their business having to pay their employees more, because maybe they won't be able to afford to pay everybody the same amount if the minimum wage increases. This can also hurt them because if they can't afford it, then there will be people that either have to get fired or have to get laid off just because these businesses cannot afford to support every single one of their employees. Although the wages have increased over the years, after doing a lot of research, going back to at least the 60s, the wages were anywhere from $2 to now they're $7.25 per hour. And when I did my research, I think the 60s was a lot lower than $2, but those were the numbers that I specifically remember. But yes, there are still millions of working Americans who are having trouble meeting their basic needs. Basic needs such as groceries, bills, rent, just things like that. My next slide is also another part of part one. So the way the U.S. has tried to address this issue is by creating wage policies or minimum wage. Many cities have created living wage policies to allow workers a high enough pay to meet their basic needs. So basically, they're just getting a high enough pay to allow them to make their needs, make their ends meet. But it still, in my opinion, is not enough to support their daily lives, especially if they have other factors, including children, pets, and just things of that sort. Like I said in my last slide, the minimum wage in the United States currently is $7.25 an hour. This amount has not increased since 2009. Why this change is so crucial is because just how terribly it affects the families that go through things like poverty and, the children that have to experience that. And according to the U.S. Census Bureau, there were 36.8 million people living in poverty in the U.S. in 2023. I can only imagine how much that has increased since then, but I could not find any information on the current amount of people living in poverty in 2025. I feel like if the government increased the wages of working Americans, there would be a lot less stress over financial stability among families and their surrounding communities. I feel like, in my opinion, there's a lot that goes into making a community, and if there's just a bunch of poverty around, like, that's not a good place to be surrounded by, and a lot of the time, unfortunately, there's just nothing that some people can do. Moving on. So for part 2, this first question was, which side should the U.S. government take? I strongly believe that the federal government should side with these working Americans and giving them the living wage that they deserve. I don't feel like there are some jobs in this world that I think are very underpaid for the amount of work that they do. For example, my mom's a teacher. I feel like she's underpaid for the things that she has to, kind of go through, and just the stuff that she has to put up with sometimes. She teaches little 5-year-olds, so I wouldn't imagine it's all sunshine and rainbows. But just even jobs like people working in stores or small businesses or just things of that sort that may not make as much money as compared to, other jobs. I believe that if every working individual in America earned a living wage, it would benefit our country in so many ways. Poverty rates, for one, would decrease extremely, and everybody would feel more financially stable. This would also help our communities. This would also help the living conditions in some communities. It would help it increase in ways if there was a living wage. Who's in support of making this a thing, making living wages a thing? I believe that groups in favor of this are young adults, just especially because I find that a lot of young adults I see working minimum wage jobs, and a lot of the time I'm sure that they can be just scraping by sometimes. Democratic groups and labor unions are another big group that support living wage. Workers around the world can afford a decent life for themselves and their family. That was the goal of the Global Living Wage Coalition. Coalition? So the opposition versus agreement. I believe that a lot of small businesses could be opposed to the thought of a living wage due to the fact that, like I said in previous slides, they would have to pay their employees more. The downside to this is, again, they might not be able to stay afloat and afford to pay every single one of their employees the same amount of money if the wage number did increase. Therefore, that would mean people would be laid off, people could lose their jobs, and it could even hurt small businesses in the end. They might not be making or bringing in the money that they need to help support their employees. When you compare the two major political parties, the Republican Party is more opposed to living wages because they don't think that it should be up to, I think what I read is they don't think that it should be up to the government, something like that. But the Pew Research Center said that a majority of Republicans and Republican leaners oppose raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And the percent number of that was that 57% of them were opposed to raising the minimum wage. Creating a solution to this issue, I think there are many ways that the government can handle these issues in ways that will benefit things like small business owners and the working Americans that, help keep these businesses open, and just every job that has minimum wage. So the government, in my opinion, I think one big thing that they could do is they could provide small businesses with financial aid so that they could give them the money that they need to help pay their employees. I feel like that would take a lot of stress off of their shoulders, just knowing that they have some kind of aid to say, hey, we're struggling right now, but we can still pay you because of the aid that we're getting from the government. I feel like they could also create some kind of regulation that varies the cost of living wages based off of where you live. Now, when I was writing this, I felt like it sounded a little bit unfair in my opinion, because if everybody wants the same amount, like to get paid the same amount, obviously in some places you're going to get paid more than you would in others. So for example, if you worked in, I don't know, let's say a business in, I don't know, South Dakota, it's a lot less expensive, I would think, to live in South Dakota than it is if you worked in a business in California. So I do feel like that would kind of be unfair if everybody was striving for the same thing. But if it were me, as long as I'm getting paid enough to support my needs and my life and whatever I have going on, then that's all that matters to me. So I feel like this can make it equal in a way for everybody to feel financially stable, which is very important. The government can take action. So as I mentioned in my last slide, I think that some kind of a law that allows the minimum wage to increase based off of where you live can ensure that everyone in their specific city, state, or town can get paid enough to live comfortably. So, for example, when I was writing this, I thought about it would cost a lot less to live in Alvin than it would in, let's say, Dallas or Houston even. So I feel like if the city or, something under the state regulated the amount of pay that a worker receives based on where they live, that could also be another step taken in the direction to getting a living wage. Another objection I believe could arise is people not believing that it's fair to get paid different amounts based off of where you live. Like I mentioned in the last slide, I feel like people would still find a way to say that's unfair because we all should get paid the same. Now, some people may think, hey, I'm getting paid enough to support myself and my family, so that's enough, but others may not agree. So I go on to say that I feel like there would still be some kind of unfair comparison. With a living wage, I agree that there are both things that us as a society need to do and that the government needs to do to hold up both ends of our bargain. I feel like that the people that are working, they still need to show up and put in the same amount of work that they would every single day. But I also believe that, they work hard for their money and they work hard for what they deserve. But I also do feel like that the government should be holding up their end of the deal by continuing to pay these workers the same wage, like the same amount that they deserve. I don't feel like, they can say that they're going to do it for a while and then kind of like shut it down. I don't think that's fair. But like I said, it is crucial that working Americans continue to work hard at their jobs and continue to make the money they deserve. But it's also very important that the government continues to give these hardworking individuals the pay that they work for. With this government action in place, the world would benefit from a lot. The most important factor of a living wage that would be reduced is poverty. There will be less financial stress among families and communities. And the impact of living wages can do so much good for our country, and I believe that it is a very important issue in our world today. Especially with, inflation and all this other kind of stuff. I'm sure it's hard to go to work every day and think I'm not getting paid nearly as much as I think that I should be for all of the hours that I work or the specific work that you do. For example, I will say when I guess they took the certain degrees off of the professional degree list and people stopped showing up to work, I feel like that is one thing that could happen if this living wage action doesn't go into some kind of place, just because maybe in the future things might get too expensive to where people can't afford their lifestyle or they can't afford to even just scrape by. So they might just be like, well, I'm not getting paid enough, so I'm gonna basically go on a strike. I'm not gonna show up to work until a change is made. I'm gonna demand a change before I come back into work, if that makes sense. So like I said, I feel like this government action would do a lot of good, but I also do feel that it's very important for society to keep up their end of the deal, as well as the government. I feel like the most important thing, though, among everything is poverty for sure, because no family deserves to live like that, no child deserves to live like that. And then, of course, financial stress. Financial stress is a big thing, and I don't feel like it's right to wake up and say, what am I going to do today? Like, am I going to barely scrape by today? Which goes back to my, so that's my last slide, but that goes back to my title of paycheck to paycheck, because a lot of people, unfortunately, they do live paycheck to paycheck. They're barely scraping by most of the time, and I do feel like that with a living wage for all working Americans, that this is a very important issue that can be solved. So thank you, and have a good night.